Yuji Itadori doesn't see himself as a hero. He sees himself as a tool. And that might be the most disturbing thing about him. Not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech. I mean, what happens when someone genuinely believes their only purpose is to be used? Yuji Itadori is one of the most beloved characters in anime right now. Millions of fans cheer for him, cry for him, root for his survival. But here's what most people miss about him. Yuji doesn't think he deserves to survive. From the moment he swallows Ryomen Sukuna's finger in episode 1, Yuji doesn't resist the role he's handed. He accepts it. He steps into the identity of vessel, of weapon, of cog in a machine with almost no pushback. And the psychological reason for that is deeply disturbing and deeply human. Today, we're going inside the mind of Yuji Itadori through a framework called self-dehumanization, and we're going to explore why some people not only accept being treated as tools, but why they believe it's exactly what they deserve. This is villain psychology. Let's get into it. Before we get into the psychology, let's set the scene, because context is everything here. Yuji Itadori is the main protagonist of Jujutsu Kaisen. He's a high school student with physically impossible strength who in episode 1 swallows a cursed finger belonging to Ryomen Sukuna, the most powerful cursed spirit in existence, to save his classmates from a deadly curse. That choice changes everything. Yuji becomes a vessel for Sukuna. He shares his body with something ancient, something malevolent, something that views him as nothing more than a temporary container. And the Jujutsu world's response to this, essentially, we'll keep you alive just long enough to collect all of Sukuna's fingers. Then we'll execute you. Let that sink in. From episode 1 onward, Yuji Itadori has a known execution date. He is officially a dead man walking. And the remarkable thing, he accepts it. He cooperates. He fights hard. He saves lives, all while knowing his final destination is a government-sanctioned death. Most of us would rage against that. We'd fight the system, bargain, run. Yuji doesn't. He internalizes it. He makes it part of his identity. That's not just heroism, that's a specific psychological pattern, and it has a name. In psychology, self-dehumanization refers to the process by which an individual strips away their own personhood, their agency, their uniqueness, their inherent worth, and begins to view themselves as an object, a function, a tool. It's different from low self-esteem. Low self-esteem says, I'm not good enough. Self-dehumanization says something colder. I'm not a person, I'm a means to an end. Research in social psychology, particularly work building on Herbert Kellman's foundational studies on dehumanization, shows this pattern can be externally imposed, like in propaganda or abuse. But it can also be self-generated, especially in individuals who've experienced early trauma, high control environments, or repeated reinforcement that their value is purely functional. Yuji Itadori shows 5 distinct dimensions of this framework, and they map almost perfectly onto documented real-world psychological patterns. Let's break each one down. Trait 1. The moment he stops being a person. In episode 1, Yuji is given a choice. He can let his classmates die, or he can swallow Sukuna's finger and become something he doesn't fully understand yet. He chooses the latter without hesitation. On the surface, that reads as selfless heroism, and it is. But watch what happens to Yuji's sense of self immediately after. He doesn't say, I took a risk. He doesn't say, I made a sacrifice. He starts framing himself as a container, a vessel, a body with a purpose assigned by others. The shift is subtle at first, but it accelerates with every finger he consumes. By the time season 1 progresses, Yuji has stopped asking, what do I want? The question that dominates his psychology is, what am I for? That shift, from subject to object, from person to function, is the core of self-dehumanization. And once it begins, every subsequent decision Yuji makes flows from this new self-concept. I am not the main character of my own life. I am an instrument in someone else's story. Trait 2. Surrendering control to a higher purpose agency is the psychological sense that you are the author of your own actions, that your choices belong to you. Yuji's agency is systematically dismantled, not just by others, but by himself. Think about the structure of his existence. The Jujutsu authorities control whether he lives or dies. Sukuna controls his body when he surfaces. Mission assignments control where he goes and what he fights. Yuji's actual latitude for independent choice? Minimal. But here's the psychological twist. Yuji doesn't resist this. He rationalizes it. He tells himself that giving up agency is noble, that deferring to a higher purpose, to saving people, is a form of meaning. This is a textbook pattern in what researchers call learned helplessness, first documented by Martin Seligman in the 1960s, where repeated exposure to uncontrollable circumstances teaches a person to stop trying to exert control, even in situations where they actually could. Yuji isn't stupid, he isn't passive in combat, but psychologically, he has learned that his desires, his fears, his preferences, they don't matter. He is a resource to be deployed, and he has accepted the terms. Trait 3. My only value is my usefulness. Ask yourself, when does Yuji feel good about himself? Always tied to utility. He saves someone. He completes a mission. He protects a classmate. His emotional regulation, his sense of worth, is almost entirely contingent on being useful to others. When he can't save someone, the devastation isn't just grief. It's closer to an identity crisis. Because if his value is rooted in what he can do for others, then failure doesn't just hurt him. It makes him question whether he has a right to exist at all. Psychologists call this contingent self-worth, and when utility becomes the sole basis for self-value, you get a dangerous psychological equation: useful equals worthy, useless equals disposable. Yuji Itadori has internalized this equation completely. He isn't fighting to live. He's fighting to be useful enough to justify having lived. Trait 4. The psychological distance from his own humanity. There's a clinical term for the experience of feeling detached from yourself, of watching your own life like a movie you're not fully inside. It's called depersonalization, and it's one of the more unsettling entries in the psychology of trauma. Yuji doesn't just carry Sukuna, he shares a consciousness with him. And that means on some level, Yuji has had to make psychological room inside himself for something that fundamentally isn't him. The only way to survive that, cognitively and emotionally, is to create distance from your own identity, to loosen your grip on who I am so that the presence of an other inside you becomes bearable. Research on complex trauma, particularly Bessel van der Kolk's work in The Body Keeps the Score, shows how dissociation and depersonalization function as adaptive responses to situations where the self is too painful or too unsafe to fully inhabit. Yuji has adapted brilliantly, tragically. Trait 5, believing he deserves to be sacrificed. This is the darkest trait, and it's the one that makes Yuji Itadori genuinely heartbreaking to analyze. At multiple points in Jujutsu Kaisen, Yuji doesn't just accept that he might die. He believes he should, not because he's suicidal in a clinical sense, but because his internal logic has reached its conclusion. He is a vessel for something destructive, he is a death sentence walking, and people have died because of him. Therefore, his death is appropriate. To him, his death isn't a tragedy. It's the correct outcome. This is exploitation acceptance, the psychological state in which a person not only tolerates being harmed or sacrificed by others, but has integrated that expectation into their self-concept so deeply that they volunteer for it. Watch how Yuji talks about his own death. He doesn't grieve it, he doesn't bargain, he speaks about it practically, functionally, like it's a scheduled appointment he's already made peace with. The psychological literature on this, particularly in studies of survivors of prolonged abuse and exploitation, consistently finds that this acceptance isn't weakness, it's a sophisticated defense mechanism. If the harm is inevitable, owning it feels safer than fearing it. If you're already worthless, you can't be further diminished. Yuji Itadori has decided he is already on borrowed time, and in that framework, dying for others isn't a tragedy. It's the one thing he gets to choose. Here's the question I want to leave you with. If someone asked you right now, what are you for? What would you say? If your answer is a list of things you do for others, roles you fill, functions you serve, and if there's nothing in that answer about who you simply are that might be worth sitting with, Yuji Itadori is one of the most powerful characters in anime. He's physically extraordinary, he's emotionally resilient, and yet his greatest vulnerability isn't Sukuna, it isn't Mahito. It isn't the Jujutsu world's death sentence. His greatest vulnerability is that he genuinely doesn't believe he has value beyond his usefulness. The antidote to self-dehumanization isn't strength, it's not willpower. Psychologically, the recovery process is about something much quieter and much harder. Learning to exist without justification, to be a person without an assigned purpose, to believe, really believe, that your presence in the world doesn't require a use case. Yuji hasn't learned that yet, and watching someone this extraordinary fail to value themselves is, I think, one of the most honest things Gege Akutami has put on the page. That's the human cog. That's the tragedy of a tool that could have been a person. If this analysis hit differently, if you recognize this pattern in yourself or someone you know, share it. The comment section is open. I want to hear which part of Yuji's psychology resonated most. I'm Villain Psychology. See you in the next one.